It's happened. I hereby declare that I am officially bestowing my first 5-star rating of the 2025 cinematic season. I mean, judging by the trailer, premise, and talent, I assumed we would at least get a 4.5 if it went well, but Ryan Coogler far surpassed that.
Lady, brother. Be careful. I will.
Hi, I'm LadyJenevia, and on my channel I talk about entertainment media. Before we get into this review of Ryan Coogler's Sinners, I will first establish that this first section will be labeled as less spoilers, and then we will have the full spoilers section. I will give my Letterboxd review first, then an overview of my feedback, and once we go into full spoilers, we will go into more of the plot analysis because this story is very layered and full of socio-political commentary. It's the type of art that very much invites that type of analysis. So first up, my Letterboxd review. Ryan Coogler's Sinners presents a politically poignant, multi-ethnic melting pot that beautifully showcases how every person is an entire universe. Not only that, it conveys the deep tragedy of how intergenerational historical trauma is a commonality among so many groups that might otherwise forget nowadays that they are stronger and life is better together. Once the film switches gears, it becomes a truly high-octane ride, with a score and soundtrack that elevates every facet of the film to another level. Two musical numbers in particular absolutely blew my mind. The second one was what made me fully lock in my score at 5 stars. I started the film at a 4.5, and it kept climbing the further we went. There was so much more I could rave about, but I am staying spoiler-free until my video review. But even if you know plot spoilers beforehand, it isn't the same as actually watching the film in full. It's not just a movie, it truly is an experience. See it on the biggest screen possible. My press screening was on a full, enormous IMAX screen, and it was incredible. Now, I've seen some excellent films this year. I've given out multiple 4.5 ratings on Letterboxd, but if you are new to my channel, I grade new films on a curve because it makes things much easier for me to keep everything organized, and that way I have a better idea of what my top 10 is going to be once I get to December, instead of getting swept up in the excitement and magic of cinema as an art form and just giving every new movie a 5 simply because I love movies. Sinners tells the story of two brothers, twins, played by Michael B. Jordan, named Smoke and Stack, and a number of other characters who fill out the large ensemble. Smoke and Stack are looking to open up a juke joint, but little do they know that vampires are set to arrive and disrupt their opening night with mayhem and bloodshed. Sinners was shot on film, IMAX to be more specific, and in general, the look of the film is truly exquisite to behold. The way that people are lit, the color grading, the shot composition, really every detail has been meticulously tended to, and it makes all the difference in the final result. There isn't a single bad performance. Being that there is a large ensemble, I might not mention everyone in this video, but make no mistake, everyone was fully committed to giving this incredible screenplay everything they had. Whatever the character or a particular moment called for, they delivered. Heart, humor, vulnerability, despair, terror, the whole array was on display. I didn't keep track of this particular detail since it was an early press screening where if you pull your phone out, you can get kicked out. But I would estimate that you don't get to the juke joint until about halfway through the runtime, but once that starts, every single part of the story and the overall visual, sensorial experience gets amplified by quite a bit. When the action gets going, that was very well put together, but actually one of the most important things about the storytelling is that they took all of that time and care to develop all of these different characters in the ensemble in the first half, so that when they're eventually put in danger or even outright turned into vampires, you are significantly more emotionally invested in the dramatic stakes of the story and the physical and emotional well-being of these characters. If any harm comes to them, if they're bitten and turned into a vampire, it hurts far more. Sinners doesn't waste a single minute of its runtime. Every moment matters. I already know I need to see this multiple times because there are often these moments where characters will tell stories and reflect on things from their past, and it somehow doesn't come across like exposition dumping. Now, in a lesser movie, with a lesser screenplay, with a lesser director, and lesser actors, it might not work, but everything that's shared in Sinners feels meaningful. Everything these characters share enriches the world building, acting and the audience's connection to these people. Sinners is absolutely drenched in pathos, and I mean that as a compliment. It's really difficult for me to pick out a favorite character or characters simply because all of the things these people share are what led me to make that point in my Letterboxd review about how this film really makes you see that every person is an entire universe. There can sometimes be a stereotype for horror, or maybe for slashers in particular, where quite a few characters can end up feeling disposable. You more or less know who's going to get got, and probably even a general sense of the order in which they will be knocked off by the killer of that story. It doesn't mean that every slasher is like that, but some of the less remarkable horror films that I've seen, yes, I would say I've observed them follow that pattern or that stereotypical archetype. But with Sinners, it's made very clear that these people are not disposable, and that really ties into a lot of what the film seems to be saying thematically. Now, I won't elaborate on all of that right now because we are not in the full spoiler section yet. First, I have to give the utmost praise to the music in this film. It has such an important role in the story as it's deeply woven into the storytelling as well as the filmic language. And as a Baz Luhrmann stan, I highly approve of that.
Bit of foreplay, twinkle in the eye, the deed, pregnancy.
There's Ludwig Göransson's original score, but also quite a few songs that already existed, though of course those songs were recorded and performed by the various cast members and rearranged to suit this film and the scenes that they were performed in. But I absolutely love how much focus there is on the music in the most minute details. As a vague example, when one of the characters tries to light a match, the sound of the match being struck is on beat with the score that is playing in that moment, and I live for details like that. Even if the film isn't technically a musical, it comes close enough to satiate my appetite for a big bombastic movie musical. I love the era of big MGM movie musicals, and I love Baz Luhrmann films, and Sinners delivers many of the qualities that I tend to be drawn to in the film medium. So when I look at the sum total of its many merits, it's not even remotely surprising that I would give it 5 stars. I also, just in general, have a lot of fun with vampires in film. The good, the bad, and the guilty pleasures, bring all of them on. Bram Stoker's Dracula, the original and the most recent Nosferatu, Queen of the Damned, because you will never make me hate Alia as Akasha, and that soundtrack rips. Van Helsing, Låt den rätt komma in, Blades 1 and 2 only, The Little Vampire, really there are just far too many to name, all of the ones that I've enjoyed. I'm really not interested in the elitism of vampires needing to be done or designed in a particular way. As long as you have fun with it, make it engaging, compelling, and entertaining, you're making it worth my time. So as soon as they said Ryan Coogler is doing a vampire movie, I was ready. Even when we got that early teaser where we didn't even get to see much in the way of the film's vampirism yet, I was ready. But Ryan Coogler's Sinners was so much more than I could have anticipated. It completely outdid my already optimistic expectations. Like I said before, I already assumed it would at least get a 4.5 rating and be somewhere up in the cluster of my favorite films of the year so far. But it vampire super sped past everything currently on my 2025 list to secure my first 5-star rating of the 2025 cinematic season. Now, if you have a chance to see this on a full IMAX screen, you absolutely should. It maximized the impact of everything, the shifting aspect ratios, the characters, emotions, action, horror, romance, all of those things and more. There is also a mid-credit scene and a little something extra after the credits, but there is no doubt that the film does feel like a complete story. It doesn't necessitate a sequel. Now, if Ryan Coogler has an idea for a sequel that he really wants to make himself, I would absolutely watch that, but that is only because of how incredible his work was on this film. My takeaway from Sinners is not that it requires a sequel, but simply that whatever original story Ryan Coogler makes next, I need to watch it. As long as it's not a corporate IP, I'm very interested. I do have an idea for a Sinners spin-off film that I would be highly intrigued to watch, but I will say what that idea is in the full spoiler section. So, to reiterate, Ryan Coogler's Sinners is a 5-star masterpiece. Go watch it, and then watch it again. I've already seen it twice, and if you follow me on Letterboxd, you can see how many times I end up seeing it in total at the cinema.
Will somebody take me in your eyes?
Okay, now let's get into all of these spoilers. I want to focus more on the analysis of the material and what it is I honed in on the most in the story and how I interpreted all of that. I have somewhat categorized the major topics that I would like to get into and that really stood out to me into 5 specific ones, but they often overlap a lot with one another. They are, in no particular order, time, violence, music, relationships, and solidarity. Let's start with time. Sinners takes place in Mississippi in 1932. It's during the period of Jim Crow laws, and for any international viewers that might not be privy to some of those historical details or context, this is a period of time that takes place after the abolition of slavery in the US, but Jim Crow laws were up and running, and those were oppressive laws enacted after abolition to put forth various forms of racial segregation. They restricted the black population from being able to access a multitude of things, such as full job opportunities, equal education opportunities, the right to vote, and so on and so forth. The first character we actually meet in Sinners is a boy named Sammy Moore. I don't remember if they ever specified exactly how old he's supposed to be. I would guess that it's either somewhere at the end of his late teens or his early 20s. But Sammy is Smoke and Stack's cousin, and he's also the son of a highly religious preacher. When we first see him, he has these scratches on his face and the remnants of a guitar. He goes into the church where his father is preaching, and then we get the revelation that basically the entire film takes place in one day. Count that. One day. The prior day. So we rewind one day, and that's when everything begins. This is already interesting to me, the fact that we're using only one day to put humanity under a microscope, but at the same time, they expand the scope of the film's perspective on time as a concept, and I'll give a couple examples of this. One of them is that the first big musical number that Sammy does in the juke joint, where he's singing a song and he's playing the guitar, we begin to see more people than just the characters we've met in the 1930s. We see black musicians, dancers, and artists that are from a multitude of places and backgrounds. There are African dancers wearing their various traditional indigenous attire, doing what we can presume to be dances that are traditional to whichever group they are from. There are also black MCs, DJs, hip-hop dancers, there are women twerking, and performing art that would have been created and popularized decades after this 1932 story of Sinners. If you create art for a living, because it's your passion and your purpose, it's natural to ponder the legacy of art and how it can serve as a window through time. If you are watching or listening to art from decades or centuries past, you are connecting to the past. If you create art that speaks to the issues of your time, it can then inform people for decades or centuries that follow, long after you are gone. But at the same time, are you ever really gone if you live on through your art? You see how it all starts to become very long-winded and existential? But anyway, Sinners perfectly encompasses those ideas in as concise a manner as you can when you have about a million other things going on in the story at the same time. There is a lot of historical weight behind the characters in the story of different backgrounds that then tie into the socio-political subtext that is woven throughout the story. Not just the historical subjugation of black people in America, but also with there being Chinese characters that harkens back to the use of Chinese labor to build the Transcontinental Railroad, and also the history of colonial violence against indigenous people, as well as Irish people, but I will revisit that particular point in great detail in an upcoming section. Now let's talk about the film's use of violence. I found the approach to violence and the narrative about how and when violence is used to be very interesting. Smoke and Stack, the twin brothers played by Michael B. Jordan, they have moved back to their hometown after having spent some time in a big city, Chicago, where they had hoped to make more money than would be available to them in their small town. The money they have brought home with them is clearly, repeatedly said to have been obtained through criminal activities. I remember hearing Al Capone's name being mentioned. So when they come back with what amounts to blood money, or money obtained through more or less needless violence, that money now has baggage attached to it. Smoke and Stack have their own respective romantic partners, Annie and Mary. Annie outright says when she's offered some of this money that she doesn't want any of it because she doesn't want blood money. So vampirism is an allegory in this film for inherently oppressive violent systems, whether it's capitalism, colonialism, or white supremacy. When you have Jack O'Connell's character making his pitch and inviting these characters to join him and become a vampire like him, it's an invitation to be part of that violent status quo. Now, there are benefits to becoming a vampire: strength, less vulnerabilities, superpowers, and in theory, you could maybe live forever, certainly at least a lot longer than the average human life. But there is a catch. You are now inherently more violent as a living being, and you will regularly cause harm to others against their will. The purveyors of this kind of systemic violence will try to claim a false equivalency, that if the victims of systemic violence retaliate, now all of a sudden they're saying violence is wrong. Case in point, there is a distinct difference between the architects of the transatlantic slave trade versus someone like John Brown. And when it comes to Sinners, there is a distinct difference between a violent gang of vampires trying to pick you off one by one and forcibly transforming you into a member of their death cult versus Michael B. Jordan at the end of the film gunning down a bunch of Ku Klux Klan members. It's not the same. Sinners has an intelligent narrative design in which systemic oppressive violence is condemned, while revolutionary violence that fights back against that oppression is revered and celebrated. So of course I was going to give this film a high score. If you've seen any of my reviews, you would know that. Now we can talk about the film's music. This is a major selling point of the film to the audience at large, but also to speak to what I happen to be particularly fond of in the film medium. I was raised on movie musicals. I love a big movie musical. So the music of this film, it's not just about incorporating music that sounds good or conveys a particular tone or emotion that is relevant to whatever scene or character is the point of focus at that point in time. Music is a multifaceted tool. It's an art, it's a form of self-expression, it's a means of facilitating social connections around you, but also grounding you in your history, your culture, your people. Much of what you hear musically is rooted in the blues. Being that Baz Luhrmann's Elvis is one of my favorite films to be released in the last couple of years, it's only natural that I'm going to be reminded a bit of the origins of Elvis as an artist and how Baz Luhrmann went about presenting that in the film. But there are a number of famous artists presented in his film as well, such as Sister Rosetta Tharpe, Big Mama Thornton, Arthur Big Boy Crudup, just to name a few. With Sinners, you see how music is bringing everyone together at this juke joint. That music is something so fundamental to Sammy's being that he has to pursue it even against his father's wishes and commands. And music, like I talked about in the time section, is a bridge through time. That's why when Sammy sings that song and we get this massive, impressive musical number, he is connecting to the past, present, and future of his people. And he's also, unfortunately, able to summon a vampire named Remick. And actually, I've been clamoring to start talking about the Irish thing. I did not know beforehand because I didn't look up any spoilers or watch any interviews before I saw the film for the first time because I wanted to be surprised. But Jack O'Connell gets to play an Irish character once again. It's not the first time he's done that in his career, but when you hear him speaking in the trailer, he's not speaking with an Irish accent, so that's why I had no idea that was coming.
Oh, we heard tale of a party.
This world already left you for dead. I can save you from your fate.
You don't need no saving.
Yes, you do.
So let me tell you about the moment I locked in my score of 5 stars. When Jack O'Connell, Mr. Éo Middock himself, that's a Lady Chatterley's Lover reference, when he started singing The Rocky Road to Dublin, every cell of my body screamed because that's my song. Sammy's musical number was incredible, but I was still on the journey at that point of trying to fully put together all of the moving parts of this story, the characters, the themes. But Rocky Road to Dublin, that set everything together. That's when it all made sense. I listened to the Rocky Road to Dublin all the time, specifically the Kings of Connaught version. It's a bop.
So now if you'll excuse me, they're playing my jam.
The Rocky Road to Dublin, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Put the hair and turn down the Rocky Road and all.
Irish music consistently gets me going, and the role that Irish music plays in Irish history, whether it's rebel songs or even just songs that document feelings, be they hopeful or melancholy, about having to go elsewhere to try to make a better life, it's so perfectly in tune with the themes in Ryan Coogler's Sinners that it just really makes me want to send Ryan flowers or chocolates, just whatever his preferred thank you gift is.
So I don't know what else to say. Shall I sing a rebel song?
And not to state the obvious, if you don't already know, but just to briefly touch on this point now before we elaborate on it more in just a bit, the Irish people have experienced 800 years of violent colonialism and ongoing occupation by England, and they have fought back against it that entire time. They're still partitioned and occupied today, so if you have an extremely superficial idea of Irish immigration as just something they're doing for fun or because they feel like doing a bit of traveling, that's missing out on a lot of context about what the living conditions were like in Ireland and why. English colonialism.
We're in the home of the enemy, Kathleen.
Michael,
We're 1,000 years, Kathleen.
just enjoy your...
But again, let me put that talking point on pause because now I want to talk about topic number 4, which is relationships. The relationships we see in the main ensemble of characters are treated as extremely precious and meaningful. When Smoke and Stack are trying to gather people that they already knew in their hometown to help with the opening night of this juke joint, it's mostly people with whom they already had those meaningful relationships with. And by observing these dynamics play out, you truly get that sense of community and camaraderie. One thing the film makes abundantly clear is that money is not the true source of happiness. Now, of course, it's built into the story's narrative that money is a necessity for these people's survival, for these characters who live under inherently violent systems. They live under Jim Crow laws in the South, they live under capitalism. But the truly meaningful parts of their lives are the love and care that most of the characters we meet have for one another. There are romantic relationships, parental, familial, friendships, and just overall true community. When you get to that mid-credit scene where those three characters are reflecting back on that night when all of the bloodshed and mayhem ensued, they agree that before all of that began, when it was just everyone together, that was the happiest, best day of their lives. 60 years on, all that time they've been able to live, and yet nothing was better than that. Everyone just being together. But the tenderness and care for the relationships among this group is merely a prelude, a warm-up to the film's most central thesis and the most intriguing talking point of the story, which is solidarity. Now, I could probably talk about this for an hour or longer just on its own. When Smoke goes to recruit Grace and Bo Chow, it was one of the first glimpses I got of the film's messaging surrounding solidarity. More specifically, it was the solidarity among different marginalized groups whose labor was used, or exploited, should I say, to build up the settler colonial project of the United States, whether it's slavery or Chinese labor on the railroad. But these are not the only marginalized groups we meet in this film. The first time we meet Remick in the film, he is injured and running away. He comes across this small house and he knocks on the door, pleading for help. I really want to talk more about his behavior and actions while pleading his case, but let me pause that just momentarily to say that after Remick is let inside, a group of indigenous people ride up, they knock on the door, they're looking for Remick, they warn Hailee from Mozart in the Jungle.
Hailee! Hailee!
Hailee. Sorry.
That he's dangerous, but the sun is going down, so they have to head out because unlike more or less everyone else in this movie, they actually know what vampires are and are very aware of what's going on. By the way, this is the spin-off idea I had in mind. If Ryan Coogler has a different original story that he would like to work on next, I would love to see him be a producer on a movie about indigenous Choctaw vampire hunters. Bring in a Choctaw director, a Choctaw screenwriter. I will pre-order my ticket right now if it will help you get that movie greenlit. Let me see it. I will be there opening weekend. Now, I was working on most of this movie review when I had only seen the film one time at my early press screening, but I saw the film a second time on opening weekend and I was able to catch more details. So now I have a case to make about the film's messaging of solidarity. The first time I was watching Sinners, I didn't realize until much further into the film that Remick is Irish. It wasn't until he started singing Irish songs and going in and out of his original Irish accent that I went, oh, we're really doing this. We're bringing the Irish into this. And you know what? I love that. I wasn't entirely sure how knowledgeable Ryan Coogler was about the Irish, and it wasn't something I knew to look out for until my second watch. In the film's opening, when Annie is doing the voiceover explaining about the mythological musical powers that we are eventually going to see Sammy have, that I heard her name the Choctaw. Then we see Remick come up to this house and he's asking them for help. He specifically names the indigenous people that are coming after him as being Choctaw. To give you a bit of context, the word indigenous is a very broad umbrella term, but if you know someone's specific tribe, it can often be regarded as more polite or preferable to refer to them by their specific tribe, just so that you're not presuming an incorrect homogenization of indigenous people worldwide and flattening their identities into a one-dimensional stereotype. There are different indigenous groups all over the world who are going to have different traditional languages, clothing, other types of traditions, and so on and so forth. So the first time I was watching the film, I was more easily falling into the assumption based on the archetypes often seen in Hollywood entertainment media, where if you have a film that is a period piece with lead characters who are black, if there's a white villain or multiple white villains, they are going to be racist. That's just what's usually presented. But here's the thing about watching Sinners for a second time. It's going out of its way to specifically name the Choctaw twice. The Choctaw are the very specific tribe that sent a payment over to Ireland when they were being starved to death by England. This was in 1847 that the Choctaw found out what was happening to the Irish people. This was only 14 years after the Choctaw had been displaced from their homes during the Trail of Tears. So despite being in a very difficult situation themselves, they all gathered and fundraised $170 and sent it over to Ireland. And that is the equivalent of a few $1,000s today. And that friendship between these two groups endures to this day, almost 200 years on. If you decide to look up news stories on this, by the way, just be mindful of some misinformation floating around. Whenever it's British or American reports on the story, they always use the wrong language. They will say that, oh, it was just crop failure causing the starvation. That's incorrect. The English occupiers were stealing food. And when the Irish started donating money a couple of years ago to help Indigenous people during the pandemic, they were not repaying a debt. It's absurd to use the word debt. The Choctaw were not loaning the Irish people money. It was a gift for people who were in need.
Yeah, because Ireland was used as England's breadbasket. So whenever they were having their wars, they used to use all the Irish food and ship it abroad to fight against Napoleon.
There was food, like, I mean, during the famine, there was plenty of food in Ireland. There was tons of food being shipped to India for British soldiers during the famine time, so there was plenty of food to go around. So obviously, you know, that it's a myth that it was because of the potatoes that everybody dies. It was because of the export of food from Ireland that people died.
Okay, now back to Sinners. I don't believe that Remick referring to the men hunting him as Choctaw is a coincidence. Ryan Coogler wrote this screenplay himself, and he is very intentionally naming the Choctaw. He is imploring the audience to either already understand the historical context or to look it up and learn more about that. And moreover, I don't believe that Remick is a bigot, because when he's pleading to be let into this house, when he looks inside their house, and he observes the Ku Klux Klan uniforms, that's when he switches tactics and he offers them money, because he immediately realizes that he is dealing with some of the most evil people around. He understands that these people are oppressors, and thus he cannot appeal to their sense of empathy because they don't have it. And if you listen very closely to everything Remick says throughout the film, he never uses racial slurs. He never speaks to characters in some sort of racially charged language. Now, when he speaks to Grace in Chinese, he is being crude and inappropriate, but most of what he's doing is with the purpose of demonstrating how the knowledge is shared in their collective vampire hive. He's also trying to provoke her and the rest of the group into letting them inside the juke. But that's because he's trying to force them to be turned into vampires as well. He's not specifically targeting them because of their ethnicities. Now, Remick is a villain, but he's a tragic villain. He's not written the way that the Klan members are, the ones that show up the next morning and get shot up by smoke, which was terrific fun to watch.
It's my favorite movie of all time.
Yeah, me too.
Those people threw the slurs around like it was their favorite thing to say, and they specifically wanted to enact violence because of people's ethnicity. Now back to Remick. When he explains more of his motivations for targeting this juke joint, he says he wants Sammy, because Sammy's musical powers have the ability to generate those visions of people spanning past, present, and future, of his own people. That's what that first big musical number in the juke joint demonstrated.
But it also can pierce the veil between life and death.
Remick says that he wants to see his own people again. And this is when you need to have a bit more of that context of Irish history, but before I get into that, let me also add that at the very end of this vampire versus human battle, when Remick has a hold of Sammy in the water, Sammy begins to recite a prayer. Our Father who art in heaven, and so on and so forth. And when Sammy is saying this prayer, Remick joins in. He knows all the words. And when he joins in, he switches back to his Irish accent. Thy will be done. And he tells Sammy that the men who stole his father's land forced those words on them, but he still finds some comfort in them. Remick is talking about the English. Long before the indigenous tribes of Turtle Island were invaded and colonized by the English, centuries before all of that, you know who got invaded and colonized by those same people? Ireland. Now, they don't give you the full lore of Remick as a character, so at best, you use the context clues from Ryan Coogler's story, the historical trivia, and various versions of vampire lore to put something together. So here is what I came up with. We don't know exactly when Remick was born, but my headcanon is that Remick was in Ireland during that famine that was caused by England, and he was there when the Choctaw sent over their gift. When Ireland was being starved, many people died, and many people had no choice but to immigrate. Nearly 2 million Irish people immigrated to the colonies known today as America in the 1840s because of that English imperial violence that was starving them back home. So if Remick came over around that time, My headcanon is that he was forcibly turned into a vampire after he immigrated. In the original Dracula story, which, by the way, was written by an Irishman, Bram Stoker was Irish, Bram was short for Abraham, Bram was his pen name. In that story, Dracula has to sleep during the day on dirt from the land where he comes from. So, when he travels over an ocean, his coffin has to be filled with that dirt. Ryan Coogler doesn't specify the full details and rules of his vampires and sinners, but the context clues of how Remick speaks suggests that maybe he's not able to go home. He's a vampire. He's got super strength, superpowers. I don't see why he can't just get on a boat and return to Ireland. Unless maybe there's a magical reason that he cannot do that. It's either that or because of his age, he wants to be able to have that window into the past to be able to see the Irish people as he knew them in the 1840s when he left, because if he goes back to Ireland now, he's going to see 1930s Irish people instead. But there's this feeling of loneliness, sadness, and melancholy in the nuances of Jack O'Connell's performance and Ryan Coogler's screenplay that I absolutely adore. Also, before I carry on with my point, I am so thrilled that it was specifically Jack O'Connell cast to play him. Not just because he's a fantastic actor whom I love watching perform. My most liked review on Letterboxd is me hyping up the version of Lady Chatterley's Lover that Jack was in. But Jack has Irish heritage. He's from Derby, but Jack's father was Irish, and Jack is very in touch with his Irish roots. He's even dug into his own family history because of past jobs in which he played Irish characters. Like so many Irish families, O'Connell's has historical experience of conflict with the British, but it wasn't until he started picking brains in the run-up to filming 71 that he found out exactly what that experience was. He discovered that his great-grandfather had housed Irish Republican fighters on his farm. The British authorities got wind of this, came to the farm, and interrogated him while they marched several of his stallions off a cliff. When he wouldn't say a word, they put a bullet in his head. I don't have to take that personally, O'Connell says, reflecting on his own national identity. I'm not trying to reignite any feuds that have since been overcome. But at the same time, I don't regard myself as a Brit. Ryan Coogler, you are so extremely big brain for casting Jack O'Connell to play this role. Tell me where to send you flowers or some other gift. I will do it. So as Sinners, there are so many clues that this narrative understands and has empathy for the marginalization of Ireland under English rule, and how that colonial violence is yet another version of what all of these main characters are living under. Jim Crow. So when Remick is offering them all of these perks of becoming vampires like him, it's evident that he means well, but his logic is flawed because, as I've already stated, in Ryan Coogler's Sinners, vampirism is an allegory for an inherently violent system, and there can be no true solidarity or freedom under an inherently violent system that requires you to feed upon others to survive. The system itself requires blood and death to survive. So despite Remick having some admirable qualities, he is still a villain because this system needs to be destroyed. Vampirism is not sustainable despite the more sympathetic mid-credit scene that we see play out after all the bloodshed and mayhem. Remick's lack of understanding regarding this point reminded me a lot of this one interview clip I saw where Kneecap were explaining their experiences as Irish anti-imperialists.
This American tour, North American tour, Canada and America, is very important for us to remind the Irish Americans and the Canadian Irish how they were treated when they first came to these countries and the discrimination that went on with the Irish people. And I think it's easy to forget that history and to be hard on people who immigrate because they have no choice to immigrate their country. So I think we now have to go back to our roots, and especially in America, where Irish Americans maybe have got a status in society that they have forgotten that once upon a time they didn't have that status and they were discriminated against.
Yeah,
like the way immigrants are now discriminated against all around the world for immigrating because financially, whatever reason, war.
Kneecap. I love Kneecap.
The true solidarity in Sinners that is given the most reverence is not on the side of the vampires. It's those human moments of genuine, earnest, heartfelt connection and caring for one another because it's what people are supposed to do. When Grace is determined to free her husband from the affliction of vampirism because their daughter has been threatened, she and Beau end up burning to death while she is staking him. The imagery of that feels extremely intentionally reminiscent of things like anti-war protesters who self-immolate. The most publicized recent example of that would be Aaron Bushnell, but if you go back to the Vietnam War, for example, there were Buddhist monks in Vietnam who self-immolated, and then in the US, Norman Morrison did the same thing in protest against US imperialist violence against Vietnam. And all throughout that final chunk of the film, people are constantly going above and beyond to try to save one another, or save Sammy specifically, knowing very well the fact that there is a strong likelihood that they're either going to be harmed or just not survive this fight. And all of that togetherness and care for others, that's what I believe Ryan Coogler's Sinners is aiming to say about what the fundamental essence of humanity itself is. Caring for one another. Not because you get something out of it in return, but because that's the way it should be. That's the exact ideology behind why the Choctaw sent money to the Irish. Now, there is so much more I could say because this film is simply that awe-inspiring, but to summarize and reiterate once again, Ryan Coogler's Sinners is pure cinema. 5 stars. And when it comes to 2025, I have no interest in corporate products. I haven't been giving them my money at the box office. I haven't been reviewing them on my channel. My time is limited. So I've been picking the films that look like they might come from a specific artistic perspective and point of view. Ryan Coogler's Sinners is so evidently coming from his point of view. I don't know what is in that Oakland air, but first we had Freaky Tales, and now we have this, the top of my 2025 list at the moment. Fight the power, look out for one another, all of the things I love to see. Whatever original story that is not for a corporate franchise Ryan Coogler wants to make next, I am there. Chucky or law.
It's like garlic to a vampire, Kathleen. The ash. If I had the ash, Kathleen, if I have enough of it on my face, it'll scare away those pesky Protestants.